Where do you draw the line? And how hard are you willing to fight to protect what's most important to you, your family, our society? In Alaska, a controversy over the most notorious development project in the state's history is making every Alaskan ask these questions, and pressing the state and federal governments to make tough decisions about what it's worth to protect Alaska's most cherished resource, salmon. Salmon have always been a huge part of my life, ever since growing up on the banks of the Kenai River just south of Anchorage, and returning to Alaska seasonally to catch my share of the best food on earth. I've heard legends of the relatively nearby but hard to access Bristol Bay watershed, and have always wanted to witness the truly epic return of fish to this region firsthand. In 2018, the fear of a turn in history that could set a terrible precedent for Alaska finally brought me and some of my close friends to visit Bristol Bay. The rivers of Bristol Bay are the birthplace of the most productive salmon ecosystem on Earth. Nearly half of the world's sockeye salmon are born here, and if you've ever ate wild Alaskan salmon, there's a good chance it came from Bristol Bay. Anyone who loves salmon, fishing for any of the 29 species of fish found here, or just likes exploring wild and remote places, should take the opportunity to visit Bristol Bay sometime in their life. It is truly one of the most wild and pristine places you can go on planet Earth. Right when we got to the village of Iliamna, the wave of millions of sockeye, coho, chinook, chum, and pink salmon were making their annual migration back to the streams they were born in years ago, to spawn and begin the next generation of fish. This migration of salmon, carrying with them the marine-rich nutrients they have accumulated in the ocean, is the start of a cycle which affects every living thing in the region, from plants to bears to eagles, wolves, and moose. On a trip in early spring, Parker and I took off in a float plane from the village of Iliamna, and within a few minutes were landing in what is known as Frying Pan Lake, the source of the Koktuli River and one of the main tributaries of the Nushagak River, famous for being home to Alaska's largest run of king salmon. The lake is literally a stone's throw away from the proposed Pebble Mine site, a highly controversial open pit mine that was discovered to be rich in copper and gold in 1988. For decades now, the proposed mine has fought enormous pushback from Alaskans, organizations, companies, and people around the world. Our goal on this trip was to experience wild Alaska in the spirit of river adventure, paddling from the headwaters of the Koktuli to its confluence with the Mulchatna, into the massive Nushagak River, and out towards its mouth in Bristol Bay.
And it's super beautiful coming in. Saw lots of wildlife, some moose on our way in. There's an eagle up in that tree. There's been an osprey flying around catching fish out of this tributary stream into the lake. And yeah, lots of signs of bear, some moose tracks. There's been 2 helicopters constantly flying in and out, checking out what we were doing and also delivering supplies to the main mine base camp site, which if you just follow this little stream up about a quarter to half a mile, you get right to. They have a bit of infrastructure up there, some buildings, and it's pretty wild to see just the extent of how big this site is. And basically this valley right here is the central mine site. So we're gonna spend the next 4 days floating down. Got about, looks like 20 to 30 miles. There's a whole bunch of zigzags, so kind of hard to map, but we'll see what our GPS says.
Got a mean headwind though, start out.
Yeah, we decided to land on this side of the lake so we could check out the mine site a little bit, but turns out the headwind really picked up and we got about a mile to paddle before the river picks up. And even then, not a whole lot of current, so don't know how swiftly we'll be moving for this first little bit. Oh, tailwind's picking up now!
Woo! Be across this lake in no time! Oh yeah! Whitewater rafting. Woohoo! Now we're rafting.
We're going 6, 7 miles an hour.
6, 7, 8, 9. Who knows? We're moving.
About 3 hours later, we just made it to the end of the lake.
Mew. And still having fun.
We found ourselves a little beaver den here.
So first camp.
Crawl inside and call it a night.
As we got closer to the start of the river, we saw 2 eagles perched on top of a ridge, looking over the lake and the beginning of the Koktuli. Walking up to see the eagle's perspective on top of the rolling hill, we immediately noticed the piles of salmon bones the eagles had left here, the sign of last year's return of salmon to their spawning grounds. If you ever wondered why Bristol Bay has such an abundance of fish compared to anywhere else in the world, a quick view from the perspective of an eagle explains it all. In this wide open expanse, reaching for as far as the eye can see, is the perfect salmon rearing habitat. The seemingly endless network of meandering streams, wetlands, lakes, and rivers is the perfect habitat for salmon to be born and raised before heading out to sea. And it explains how these fish are able to support entire local communities and Alaskan families with healthy sustenance, often up to 80% of their protein, and the nearly 20,000 jobs that are directly linked to the Bristol Bay commercial fishing industry. This fishing industry is closely regulated by the state of Alaska to ensure that healthy numbers of salmon return every year by only allowing the harvest of a certain amount of fish and only at certain times of the day to ensure genetic diversity. The remaining populations of salmon swim hundreds of miles upstream to reach the same tributaries they were born in, to spawn with their mate and then die, completing their life cycle and leaving the precious marine nutrients they consumed in the ocean for the surrounding ecosystem and ultimately the next year's salmon, plants, and other wildlife. In just a couple hours of being here and seeing it with my own eyes, it became clear how inextricably linked the Bristol Bay fishing industry and numerous native communities are to the Koktuli and other nearby rivers. And it became obvious why an open pit mine the size of Pebble, placed in the headwaters of one of the most important Bristol Bay drainages, has raised so much opposition from local communities, Alaskans, and folks around the world. During an adventure earlier in the year, we followed the proposed transportation corridor that would be used to move the copper and gold from the Koktuli headwaters across Lake Iliamna, over numerous salmon streams, and out to Cook Inlet. Lake Iliamna is the largest lake in Alaska and one of the largest in the US, and is also home to one of only 2 populations of freshwater seals. Because it completely freezes over in the winter, ice-breaking ships would be required to operate throughout the winter. After crossing Lake Iliamna, the copper and gold would then be transported past 2 of the most popular bear viewing locations in all of Alaska. Until meeting the many boat and airplane charter companies, lodges, and guides working in the wildlife viewing industry, I hadn't even considered the impact that the new marine port, road system, and industrial presence needed to support the entire mine operation would have on the wildlife populations that migrate throughout the area. The current proposed transportation corridor borders both Katmai National Park and McNeil River State Game Sanctuary, two world-famous locations for bear viewing that support a multi-million-dollar annual industry. Every bear guide and park ranger I talked to had serious concerns about the impacts that the transportation corridor for Pebble would have on the thriving and sustainable wildlife viewing industry. After our early spring adventure down the headwaters of the Koktuli, we returned later in the summer, at the same time that the millions of salmon would be migrating back upstream to their spawning grounds. This time, we came equipped with a bigger raft and two more friends, Miranda and my brother Todd. Our goal? To enjoy wild Alaska, explore the rest of the Koktuli, and document its vital role as the spawning grounds for the salmon of Bristol Bay.
I saw like dudes like Ted Grayling, a red, and I think I just saw a king, dude.
Weather's beautiful outside. It's looking great. Raft is working, holding air, so pretty much everything's going really well. Yeah. Oh, one thing that didn't go well today is I left my rain jacket back at the lodge. So I'm committed to wearing my dry suit for the next 7 days straight.
So we're sitting here on day 8 of originally it was going to be a 5-day Koktuli River trip, and we have potentially another 50 to 60 miles of flat water to paddle to get down to another town that has a wheeled strip because our float plane couldn't fly in tonight, or this afternoon at noon because it's too windy.
What?
Just want the internet.
This came from four very awesome, kind gentlemen who flew out today. And they hooked us up with a ton of liquor and a lot more food, so.
Quite the turn of events here. It's 10, almost 11 p.m. at night, and pump the raft back up. Gonna rebuild the frame and pack all of our gear back into the raft so we can go about 55.6 miles as the Seagull flies downstream. So river miles, I'm guessing that's somewhere between 60 to 80.
And we don't know how long that's gonna take, so we're pumping up the raft. We're gonna start it right now. What could possibly go wrong?
Oh yeah! Dude, we got a wake going. I can't see anything where we're going, but
We're going.
we're going.
Steer with this
Sweet.
Back to work.
That worked.
All right, we made it just over 6 hours, 20 miles as the Eagle flies. Every now and then you get a little tailwind, can do some sailing. The rest of the time it's a headwind. And we're not quite halfway yet.
Got the last of our food rations here that was so generously gifted to us yesterday. Otherwise we'd be totally out of food, but now it's sufferfest. We're having fun.
What I love about Alaskans is that it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on. We all share the same core values of this state. Access to truly wild places, the abundance and careful management of fish and game to harvest and feed our families with, and an economy that is fueled by the fishing industry and sharing the wild Alaskan experience with tourists from around the world. In Bristol Bay alone, there are around 14,000 people working in the fishing industry, with thousands more jobs created in relation to the industry. Around $1.5 billion is generated every year from the sustainable and indefinite industry. In comparison, Pebble Mine would only create between 750 to 2,000 jobs for temporary construction work and then decline during operations. Pebble says they would produce around $1 billion of revenue for the state of Alaska annually, with only a 20-year lifespan of the mine. And the majority of its profits would go to foreign countries. Not considering all of the other social and environmental problems associated with the mine, the economics and job security alone versus the risks of Pebble Mine are enough for 70 to 80% of Alaskans to be strongly opposed to the development of this project. As the majority of fishermen, hunters, biologists, and native Alaskans will tell you, we're not against mining, but this is the wrong mine in the wrong place.